Hello. And you are joining me live with my headphones, unfortunately, as I am about to bring on Eddie for a discussion about the creative process, mental health, our artistic influences, and all of these fantastic things. So hold on while I get him on with me. I'm having a audio issue. I might just have to turn you on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, perfect. Okay. My headphones are dead. My big headphones are too big. So that's that today.
It's a bit laggy, but we'll see how it works out. I'm actually outside, so it might be a little different.
Okay. Yeah. I I can hear you really well when I hear you. Am I laggy on your end?
A little bit, but we'll kind of go through this thing.
Absolutely. It worked. All right. So I have to ask, had you heard Frightened Rabbit at all before yesterday?
It was funny because when you sent me the article about the singer, I remember reading about that. I wasn't familiar with the band all that much, but I was familiar, as it turned out, with what happened to him.
Okay.
But
Okay.
the name was familiar, but yeah, the actual I never heard like a song or an album prior to that.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, it's different. It's definitely something that if you hadn't heard it before, you'd be like, what the, why? Why is she sending me this? But I'm sure you got it.
Not really. I mean, it's kind of in my wheelhouse in terms of, I mean, I'm pretty eclectic with a lot of stuff that I listen to. I mean, I know that a lot of people think I exist in a time capsule of the 90s, but I mean, I've definitely, like, in recent months, like Phoebe Bridgers, I became a big fan of, Band of Horses. Like, they're all kind of in that kind of familiar, like, almost like somber, like folk music kind of style.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I love Band of Horses. Um, so I listened, or yeah, I checked out the Joe Rogan podcast today too, and I definitely could see where it was that you were kind of drawing inspiration and finding uh, some parallels in there. I found amazing, like what he's doing right now is so fascinating and just about.
Yeah, I mean, he's a pretty polarizing guy. I mean, obviously, I know Joe Rogan because he's from Boston, he's from Massachusetts, so I was familiar with his work on like news radio and stuff like that. I wasn't really like I didn't really adhere, like, I didn't listen to like, I wasn't like the most loyal Joe Rogan podcast listener, but there have
Yeah,
been like, I primarily stick around with like Mark Maron. Mark Maron's had some amazing interviews, but Joe's interviewed a few people. Um, like I'm a big wrestling guy, so like he did one with the Undertaker, and that was because I mean that guy had a 30-year career, and he never did any type of like conventional interview or anything like that. So it was really took you out, like the suspension of disbelief completely went away when you see this big, like, almost 7-foot Texan sitting with Joe Rogan basically talking about his career. I mean, some of the topics, like, they can range from like really out there. Like if you go on YouTube, he did one with Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins where Billy Corgan divulges that he has in fact had contact with a shapeshifter. So like there are certain interviews that kind of go off the rails,
yeah,
but
yeah,
like his recent one with Dave Chappelle is worth checking out too. Like a lot of the ones where like I'm really fascinated by the business, not so much the superficiality of Hollywood and celebrity, but the
yes,
whole idea of people who want to create art, people who want to do comedy, people that want to make music. It's just because obviously I can only live vicariously through that, being a stay-at-home father of two living in Stoneham, Massachusetts. So it's one of those things where like my life comparatively is very mundane.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's always fun to hear those stories. The one with Adam, though, from Counting Crows, which first off, when he told Joe he was 56, like immediately the existential dread and the mortality factor just completely freaked me out.
yep, yep. It goes so
Well, because
fast.
well, yeah, because 1993 doesn't seem all that long ago, and especially because you can turn on. I mean, I don't know how many people listen to terrestrial radio, but you can still turn on any radio station in Massachusetts and you will hear Mr. Jones on
Oh,
any given station at any given point.
Yeah, I'm
But
sure
his
that's what it is, because I mean, yeah, we have one station here that lives in the 90s, and that's, on rotation constantly.
So, I mean, but his stories about when the band broke and just specifically just going from this anonymous guy in the Bay Area who, was in bands and then, trying to go see a movie on his own, like a matinee, and some kid sits next to him, recognized him. It's like, hey, are you the guy from Counting Crows? And, you know, being a decent enough guy, he's like, yeah, that's me. And I'm kind of watching a movie here. The kid disappears. The next thing you know, the usher's telling him there's 100 people waiting outside. Maybe you should sneak out the back.
Yeah, yeah. That would be so weird. I don't know that I would ever have to experience that level of fandom. I staying away from that forever would be bliss. But, on the other side of it, which I think one thing Joe Rogan didn't ask was what triggered him to be so like selfless in his giving and his supporting of art career. Because everything he seems to be doing as far as, picking up indie music artists, supporting them, putting them in festivals, paying them for their merchandise and giving it away for free. Like he seems very invested in being altruistic. And why so many people get that way? How do people get big and then become altruistic? Like what did he go through to become that person?
Well, I think a few of the stories he told, I think a lot of it was basically, and I mean, I never was signed to a label. I mean, I played in bands pretty much most of my teen years and my early 20s, but from story, because I did work in radio, and a lot of the stories you hear are all pretty familiar with just how sordid and how corrupt the music industry is. And then just in terms of, I mean, being in a position where I was friends with, somebody who used to be the music director at the station I worked at and telling me how they gather data and how they get intel on what songs they can program on their station versus what they really don't want to be bothered. Because I mean, when I worked in radio, I came in at a time where they used to just cold call people and ask, hey, can I take a survey with you? What's your favorite radio station? Because when I went to broadcasting school, they said the reason why they introduced this new thing called PPM, people meters, was because people who were casual, listeners of radio didn't necessarily have a favorite station. It was just like, I don't know, what does my kid have in the car? Kiss 108. So then Kiss 108 was constantly being touted as the number one station in, say, Massachusetts, when in actuality, like, there weren't enough numbers, like tangible numbers, to back that up. So they started putting like little beepers on people, and they'd wear them in their car during their commute or at work or at home. And if they flipped the station, in my station and a lot of stations, they'd have these like little motion things, and on it, if somebody tuned out of your station, a giant signal would go off, an alarm would go off, and it would say PPM fail.
Wow. They were
And
that.
that's how they would detect if you lost a listener. And I don't remember, because I tell this story because I just think it's the funniest. I think it was you, the Madonna story. Did I tell you that story?
Yes. But you should tell it
Yeah.
again. Any listeners.
Well, no, and it was, so we used to have these cubbies when I worked at AF, and everybody, the music director when I was there was also the popular, I think she was Drive Time when I was there, but Mistress Carey. And one of the things that she used to do was she used to live on all like the industry type websites, and she would print out literature. And one of the things she printed out was an interview with a program director from New York, who they had Madonna on one of their shows. I don't know if it was like Elvis Duran or something like that, but here's Madonna, who's been like the queen of pop for God knows how many decades. And he started to like, oh my God, we have Madonna in studio talking to us. And there's a bunch of people sitting in traffic right now tuning out of Madonna doing this interview. And it was pretty much like turning radio on its head, because people were trying to figure out, like, well, if they're not going to want to listen to Madonna do an interview with us, like, how do we keep their attention?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, right? It's changed. It's now you need in front of them. People the circus. I think it's this culture of ADHD. Everything is fast. Everything is pace. Even when I put on my Joe podcast to it at 1.5 speed, I'm not gonna lie, I listen to almost every. Are you that way?
Yeah, I mean, And going back to the end of it, I think the altruism just comes from how difficult it is when you're in such a large haystack and you're the tiniest needle, and like whether you're an author or something, you're just trying to be found. And I know you've been doing an amazing job of just trying to cultivate a community of creators to just try and support each other. And yeah, I mean, there's so much content out there now that I find myself just not so loyal to one thing. I'm into pretty much everything. So, and I'll listen to so many different podcasts or read so many different blogs or something, and really just wonder to myself, like, how in the hell do writers find, like, they're not so much their cult, but their following of readers? Like, how do they develop that fan base anymore? And like even Adam was saying, he showed Joe the video of one of the bands that he supports performing in his living room, and Joe was like, "Oh my God, it only has 100 views."
Right? Oh, that was mind blowing. 100. I mean, even if that band had like a family, for crying out loud, gotten to 100 views, how is it so low? Yeah.
Well, it's the tiniest things too that make people tune out. I mean, that's why I get self-conscious about being on Instagram and doing Instagram live when like you have like a glitchy moment, or like, because people's attention spans are so much shorter now than they ever were.
Yeah.
That again, going back to just the visibility factor. And I mean, especially when it pertains to mental illness or mental well-being with any type of person in the arts, whether you're a writer or poet or songwriter or whatever, is you're in an industry that is the competition is so stiff.
Oh,
And everyone and their mother seemingly has a book now. Like I'll just be kind of like perusing like Amazon, saying like, all right, I'm number 1,000,000 or 1,000 whatever. Like what are the first like 100,000 ahead of me? Like how do I sort of like get above those?
Yeah, it seems like it's just more. And for me, I definitely think community is a race, and I'm guessing that is why he does it, because when you're working and you're surrounding yourself by people staying inspired, and it's no longer the front and the face of things, but you actually get to keep doing what you really need to do as an artist, which is just be any part of the creative process. That's why we do it at the end of the day, is because we want. And so I think that's really cool. He found that, and that he's really got his fingers in all of these things, because that's happiness right there, is getting to work.
Well, and I was telling people that because when my book first came out, I think I had about 30 copies, and I want to say I mailed at least 10 or 15 to libraries in the area, but somewhere between the mail being all screwed up, COVID, and all that, I don't actually know how many of those libraries. So I ordered another 20 copies and got in my car and physically was delivering copies. And I'm still every day on my phone obsessively checking to see which libraries I'm in, because, that's another aspect to this whole industry that is so difficult, that most people that want to be writers, and it's not to discourage people who want to write or try to get their work published, but it is saying like, you don't take into account, and he did a wonderful job kind of breaking down how distribution deals work and how difficult it is, because he had even lamented over like being an indie label and having such a hard time getting the records of his roster into independent record stores.
Yeah, I could definitely relate. I was like, I have not even gotten into a single bookstore. I'm just kind of, these days I'm gonna get in my car and drive around. I just haven't felt motivated enough to do it, and I also don't have the projection right now. So much more fun next month.
I mean, it's tough because, it's one of those things that, people don't think about, is it does weigh on you heavily. I mean, mentally, because, I mean, it's not really normal to sit at a computer. And, like I spent the last 2 weeks cold calling libraries, and a lot of libraries just getting the runaround. Oh, let me, send you over to this department. Let me send you over to that department. Whereas there would be other libraries that I would just get a person. They'd be like, yeah, just come over and drop it off, and, we'll take care of it. And it just seems so absurd, because it's like, I'm just giving it to you guys. Like, and, there's all these different committees they have to submit it to, and it has to find, like, approval. Like, the first library I found out I was in, I thought was going to be the hardest, because as an independent author, I don't have the publicity, or I don't have the notoriety of John Grisham and Stephen King or whatever. And because, we've been getting our work reviewed, but we've mostly been going through, like, even independent places or websites to get reviewed. So if we're not in the New Yorker, if we're not in the Boston Globe or whatever, Time Magazine or whatever, a lot of libraries won't even bother because they'd rather save their shelf space for books that are going to get checked out by well-known authors, by authors that there is a readership there for. So it really is like you fighting to the death to prove to people. Like, I mean, I went to a local bookstore and I just wanted to be in there because they're in my town,
Yeah.
and usually a lot of independent bookstores, they'll do like a consignment deal with the author. Like, we'll go through you directly. And I was so obsessed with getting into this one bookstore that I told the woman, she had the little form taken out, and I said, no, put that away. Like, I just want to be read. I don't, at this point with this book that's almost been out a year, like, I don't expect to get paid. So, I'd rather them make the money as an independent retailer and just hopefully find 3 readers for that book.
Yeah. There was this story circulating probably about 5 years ago. One author who would just take copies of their book, sneak it to bookstores, and sneak it on the shelf, and just leave it throughout bookstores everywhere. And
Oh, my wife has told me, she's kind of put that book in my ear. Like, if we go to Target today, like, bring a few copies and just put it on the shelves.
Drop it there. Yeah, whatever. People pick it up. You got to try it all.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to get too creative, especially because of COVID. I'm like, because there's like the little like take a book, leave a book libraries like all over my town and all over the surrounding towns. I actually debated doing a contest like very early on where I was going to slip money into one of the books and have people guess like which little local library around the area that they found my book in. Like, nothing made like maybe like $20 or whatever, but like it felt so cheap to be like, I'll give you an incentive to go look for my book.
It does. Yeah. No, I get that. But it makes it fun, and it people love the incentive thing. That's where once again you had to put on that hat and just be like, yeah, I totally feel like a complete sellout doing something like this right now. Would never normally do, but bookstores would have no problems doing it. Radio stations would have no problems doing it. We just have to be like, different hat, different person, do it. Just try whatever.
Oh, they used to in radio. We used to have to sign these forms because there was this practice in radio called payola, where record companies would they would hand somebody, the DJ, a single of whatever artist that they were trying to get on the air. That's actually, fun fact, that's how Semisonic's Closing Time became as popular as it did, because the record company was offering payola to the radio station. So basically, payola can be in the form of like a free vacation, a certain amount of cash, or drugs. And certain radio people would show up at stations with like a little baggie of cocaine tucked into like a record sleeve and be like, this is if you play this in a certain rotation. And I think it was the drummer of Semisonic did like a tell-all back in the early 2000s where he said if it wasn't for payola, like, nobody would know this song. Nobody would know who the hell we were.
Wow. Could you imagine the bar scene, Closing Time, during our youth? What song would they have played? No.
It's the right, and it's the weirdest thing because you wonder like what confluence of events have to take place in order for something to become like a cultural phenomenon. And like, for me, that's kind of the mental headspace that I get into, is like, admittedly and shamefully, I have a fear of both irrelevance and like evanescence. So like, I have that fear of like, I'm like an anachronism. I don't quite fit into this culture. I don't fit into the zeitgeist. So whatever I do is just going to feel like antiquated or completely irrelevant, or nobody's going to give a shit at all, and you're completely invisible to everybody. And it's just, there are people that really beat themselves up trying to make themselves relevant. I just, I like to write what I write, and if it catches on, great. But I mean, there was, like, I read an article about H.P. Lovecraft, who so many people know now, like, he's such a pioneer in macabre horror literature, but prior to his death, the last thing he wrote only sold 200 copies.
Wow.
And I remember reading that and thinking, I could only be so lucky. Like, I was envious of, like, H.P. Lovecraft's, like, meager 200 copies of, like, his final book just, like, released, like, I think it was, like, days or, like, a week prior to him dying.
That is so sad. Yeah. And then we attach our own self-worth to those sales. it's definitely never the case. Sometimes it takes 10 years for people to pick it up and actually start really getting into it. Did I tell you the story of oh, give me a second and I will. It's one of my little favorite books, just kind of that The Alchemist. Have you read that book?
You might have. You're lagging a little bit, so I'm like
Oh,
catching bits and pieces. So you can definitely tell me again, so you can catch me up to speed on it.
well, because he wrote that book and it was in a bookstore for 2 years and it only ever sold two copies, both copies to the same guy who came back and bought the same copy or same book a year later. It 2 years the store did absolutely nothing before somebody else picked it up and then it really started going. And now in hindsight, I'm like, okay, yeah, 2 years goes by really quickly. But if I think about that the first time I went out, I would have just all the things that would have happened at the beginning. I was reading these articles today about post-ritum. Have you heard of this?
No.
Oh God, just I told you before how I actually had Google search like, do people die after they finish a project? Like, how often is it that comes to the end of this what they consider their master or what they themselves into, and it's all wrapped up? How many is there statistics on like people just sort of falling over dead? And I came across a couple different articles, and one of them literally called it post-ritum, and it's just that way you have euphoria, you're excited to create this thing, and then all of a sudden you just crash. Like, how do you dig yourself out of that? And for me, I'm also wondering if it's something that happens. Like, do you write a book, crash, write a book, just the first one, and then it gets better and better?
I mean, there's a
Now,
lot of. I'm sorry. I'm like right now. I'm doing the very '90s thing of like find a better signal, Eddie. It's so laggy. Um, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book Confederacy of Dunces, but that's literally like I off the top of my head I can't even think of the author's name, but that book got published. He had unfortunately he had killed himself in his early 30s, and he had tried to get that book. He had tried to get that book published by so many different people, and so many people were rejecting it. And it wasn't until after his death, I think his mother had sent the manuscript to an editor or something like that, and that's when it eventually found publication. But I remember reading that because, I you every now and again I'd go on Reddit and try to get book suggestions because they have this great subreddit of just people publish 200 books. Like I recognize that I never read was this book called The Confederacy of Dunces, and I'm like, you know what, I'll give it a shot. And it was an interesting enough book. Like it was a really brilliant book, but a tad somber. Like it wasn't like the feel good book of the year, but and
yeah,
then I read that and I'm like, oh god, it was like kind of like when I read The Bell Jar. Like I was familiar with Sylvia Plath because I dated a girl who was obsessed with like Tori Amos and Sylvia Plath and PJ Harvey, and I remember just reading The Bell Jar and just like maybe I knew way too much about Sylvia Plath's life prior to reading the book, but it was hard to get through I don't even think I got through it because it was hard to get through The Bell Jar without kind of tainting the experience with like what I already knew about Sylvia Plath.
absolutely. I think a lot of times, that stuff was more poignant in its era, and then people do get obsessed with it. But when you're just kind of the macabre is when you're not really looking to see the whole picture anymore, it becomes almost too much. Um, One of the
Well,
things
that's why.
that blew my mind. I actually got to have a conversation with Scott Hutchinson, and I didn't mention this in my little snippet video the other day. But there is an album that I loved, and I was telling you that there was a song off of it, and I was just going on about how important that music was and how brilliant that it was. And all he could say was he hated it, and he was just like, "I wanted three album ever, but I get mad." He was so unsatisfied. And then I think about, when I'm looking at my work, I'm like, oh my God, I hate it. Um, what do you think is the right mentality for people to have once they're done with work? Like, do you want to love it? Do you want to hate it? Like, what's healthy?
That's a hard one too, because I've definitely been in positions where I've written something, and especially stuff that I tend to write quicker than most things, because I'm kind of used to just when I write having it just be a knockdown drag out battle to just get through this poem or whatever. So if I write like a short story or a poem, or in the last manuscript like a book, in like what I would consider record time for me, not in humanity but for myself, I immediately just go, this has got to be complete and utter shit, because it came too quickly, it came too easily, it came too naturally. And same thing, like I know a lot of songwriters like that, and I can relate on a certain level, because I'll submit like 5 poems somewhere, and I'll have maybe 3 in there, or even just 1 in there that I'm just like, this is the one I'm most proud of, and this is the one they should absolutely publish, this is the one that's gonna get published. And then they go with like the other 3 or 4 and leave the one out, and I'm just like, what the fuck, man? Like,
Yes.
those other ones are so crappy. Like, why would you want those ones over this one? And it's like, and I think that's the other frustrating part about being in the arts or being a writer or songwriter, is because you have no, I feel like some people are just possessed. They just have this innate ability to be possessed to do what they do for no other reason other than it gives them, maybe it's catharsis, maybe it's muscle memory, I don't know what, but you never really can truly fathom how certain things are going to resonate with other people, if they do at all. So when you talk to somebody that's read something you've written, whether it's a book or a song or whatever, and they tell you like, oh, this is my absolute favorite song, or this is my favorite poem that I've ever read or that you've written or whatever, it's a very foreign feeling for the most part. And then it's also like you kind of resort back to like, oh man, I suck. Like you read it back to yourself and you're just like, wow, that's such garbage. Like, how dare I even try to get that published?
Yeah. But that's, I mean, you're appealing to inner, their whole inner experience. So, whatever they're bringing to the table from how, how now is what that they're viewing your work, and whether it appeals to them it truly is their own unique experience. And once they read it, it belongs to them. They make it their own and they connect with it. And you sort of have no control at that point. And what we think is brilliant and connects to us will probably connect to people similarly minded, but not necessarily pointing to hit the mark. Yeah. It's so crazy to think.
Well, going back to that interview too with Adam, is I remember when you got that really shitty review from somebody, and I actually had a friend, Ken, he does a podcast, and somebody gave him a really crap review of a recent episode he did, because it's COVID, he's not having people come over his house, and he's interviewed some like phenomenal, like he's interviewed like, oh my god, all these amazing comedians and songwriters from like the 90s and stuff. So like, when he was rattling off the list of people he's interviewed to me, I'm like, holy fuck, what? You talked to the lead singer of Smoking Popes? How? But
Nice.
he got a 1-star interview because the audio quality left something to be desired.
Oh,
And
geez.
obviously this poor guy, like everybody's like, we're trying to figure this out. Like people are trying to figure out, Zoom and all that stuff. That it was like, I messaged him and I'm like, dude, that's indicative of somebody who's just having a bad day, having a bad lifetime, that just honestly is just taking it out on the artist. And it has literally nothing to do with you.
I was thinking a lot about that today, actually, because I feel like society has gotten so, that is what everyone loves to do. It's all about being a critic. Who is out there not criticizing, but rather just supporting, collaborating? It's all an exclusivity theme, especially when it comes to the arts. It's weird, not perfect. Shit upon. It's crazy, and that's probably why people aren't thriving, and to the extent that they could, just because it's just too wildly hard right now.
Well, something that I think you should totally see if you haven't seen or heard it already, there's this documentary that Jamie Kennedy did called Heckler. And
Okay.
basically it was poor Jamie Kennedy was doing a documentary about how basically his whole career is people shitting on the fact that he's Jamie Kennedy, and that, he's done movies that kind of tanked, but he's mostly like, everybody knows him from Scream. He's been a stand-up comedian, but in that documentary, somebody read like an obituary of a critic, and they focused on one author to do critiques of, to like criticize their work. And like that, their obituary was like the smallest thing you'd ever seen. The guy was reading it, and it was like, so and so, was known for doing like harsh criticism. He did a harsh criticism of this book, but then he went back under 2 pseudonyms and did even harsher criticisms of the same book. And the guy's reading it, and he looks at it and he goes, "Yeah, so that's not a critic. That's a crazy person."
Oh my God, yes. That is vindictive. Like, why would you do that? Why spend the time? You know?
And again, I think it's indicative of people that can love to create and know how to create. And I think, Adam, I hear this a lot though with creative types where, you have your creators and your destroyers. You have your people that just like, they really resent the hell out of somebody for being able to have done something. Even like looking at us, it's like, our books could be the only books that we get published. And not to be a downer, like I hope, and I certainly believe we'll publish more, but like, for somebody to like crap all over that, it's like, dude, like, it's not like I'm Stephen King. It's not like, I'm J.K. Rowling here. Like, dude, this is like, I'm an indie author who published one freaking book. Like, let me have my moment here.
Amen. Oh my God. Yeah, sure. It's not. They were talking to you about how hard it is to make it. It's not something that people have success. You guys have been grinding every day. You show up, you suck. I've talked to these mic nights, guys that were literally like 6 people in the crowd and 20 were just putting their feet in the water and thinking, God, what do they have to the next 6-7 years of their life like before they actually, if they serve, when they come out on the other side. This is not for the faint of heart, and you've got to have your supporters to keep going for sure.
Well, with that though, because I also worked for a stand-up comedian. He was a comedy club owner. I don't want to actually acknowledge him because he was an asshole, but I was the guy. I would make the reservations for the guests at like, I think he had 3 or 4 clubs at the time. And he had one in Worcester, and I came into work, I think it was like a Monday or Tuesday, and his wife, my other boss, is like, "Eddie, you got to hear this." And she plays me a voicemail from a state trooper who was at one of the shows with his daughter. And his daughter was pregnant, and she started heckling one of the comedians. And this was like a local comedian. This wasn't like an international, like Comedy Central. Like, this was just a local comedian just trying to get a gig. And I guess the guy started heckling her back for basically like, just doing what comedians do. He noticed that she was pregnant. He was picking on her about her weight, which again, whether you agree or disagree, but like, there are people, they thought they were enhancing the show, but the wild part was she played me the voicemail and he was a state trooper, and he was threatening to literally stake out the comedy club because obviously having been a patron, he knew that people drink, and he was threatening, "I'll hurt your business by basically parking my car outside your comedy club and waiting to bag every person that leaves for drunk driving." And I'm listening, I'm like, dude, that's a recorded threat, and you're an officer of the law. Like, and I don't know what eventually came of it, but it was just wild. Like, and again, all because they thought they were enhancing the show by being assholes.
Yeah. Yep. It's wild. Yeah. I think that's what critics really think they're doing. They think they're bringing, some kind of positivity, and they don't ever other side of what the impact that they're having. But yeah, figure out how to survive it. It's like you got to grow some tough ass skin for sure.
I say to anybody that wants to write a book or anybody that wants to get into writing is, just like anything else, acting, music, anything like that. Like, yeah, a tougher exterior.
Yep. All right. Well, I don't know if anyone on here has any questions or has anything that they want to say or be spoken to. I have someone behind me waiting to go do a speed workout. Unfortunately, I'm going to shut us down early today.
No, that's fine. Like I said, I'm getting through the kinks. I feel bad if I was talking over you because, like, I'd hear you, and then you'd like it would freeze up on me, like, ah, crap.
I keep seeing yours spinning, but then I get your audio pretty quickly. But so one of the things that I loved, and I have a YouTube clip where I actually read it, but Glennon Doyle, and I'm not going to speak to whether or not I love her work or anything like that, but I just think that this was a beautiful thing that she said, and it was, we mentally ill are the only sick people who believe our magic is inside our disease. And I touched on that speaking the other day, and like, it's so tough because when I'm in my craziest moments is when I'm my most creative, but I'm also like my most, and it's so hard to exist there, to create there, to go there, and then all of a sudden, and I don't know if you feel that same way, like if you feel yourself actually lose yourself a little bit while you're in the process.
Yeah, well, and the one thing I'd say about that is you can't live there forever. And I think we talked about that a little bit yesterday, was it can be super beneficial to your craft, but at the end of the day, like, you have to know that writing is not everything, and that you got to have hobbies. And obviously you and your husband are constantly doing like fitness related stuff, riding and stuff like that. So like, and I'm envious of that, because I think like, oh man, I need more hobbies. Because you do, when you get stuck in that space, like you exist there for way too long, and by the time you're ready to go to bed or whatever, you're just so fried because you've just beaten the hell out of yourself over like, well, I thought I had this ability to do something, and now I'm reading reviews, or nobody's buying my book, or, and it's beneficial, but it has just as many setbacks as it does, benefits.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty. Well, I thank you so much for your time today. And do you have anything else that you wanted to kick into the conversation?
I think once we get a groove going with whose Wi-Fi is better and which locations work the best, like we should definitely just start spitballing topics and try to do like little micro live bits, and just you only get good at these things by doing them and experiencing the bugs and just really kind of navigating your way through it. So
Yeah. Well, and I loved how we just had that conversation yesterday. And as soon as you posted that thing, I was like, oh my God, this is a conversation. We need to have this live, because it's just something I wanted written down and I wanted to throw around with another person. And let's definitely keep it going. If we have any listeners who have topics too that they want to shoot out, request, just direct message one of us and we will definitely get it in there. We both are putting this on our YouTubes too. So we've got the YouTube channels. I've been tweeting out random articles throughout the day talking about this, because every time I get on this, I'll start doing research and I read all about it, and I will just tweet whatever I find interesting into the Twitterverse so that I have it there cataloged later. That's all I do on Twitter. Save articles that I want to read later.
no, it works.
Yeah. Alrighty.
All right,
Well,
well,
thank you. Have an awesome day. It was so good again.
likewise.
Thank you for joining us. All right.